right, Shug. Our part three. It's the third installment of our Once Upon a Time in Hollywood discussion book club.
Sure.
For
Can't put that book down.
yeah, and we read a lot of it. We read a bunch of chapters this week.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we started with chapter 8, and it's entitled Lancer. All right. So this chapter starts off. It's day one of Rick Dalton's first day on the job on the pilot for Lancer, and remember he's hungover. He's all like he's feeling the whole hangover, but he's also nervous because he's usually he's usually the star of the show. He's usually there's a part where he's uncomfortable. Let's just say that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in chapter 8 actually before. Oh yeah, I forgot. Chapter 8 actually is the backstory to Lancer, and I was totally into it. It's like basically like the mythos of like the characters in Lancer. That's what it was. Yeah. And it's basically a family reunion. You meet the Murdoch Lancer is like the old man who's running the ranch, and then we have Johnny and we have Scott.
Yeah, Scott.
So Scott is what? He's like a Boston, Harvard.
Yeah, that's an elder
Yeah.
son.
Yeah, they're about the same age, but like he was with him less time.
Mm-hmm.
Scott was with him less time. So like both of their mothers skedaddled, as they would say, left the old man. They went back to New England
For different reasons.
Yeah, for different reasons. Very cultured. He actually was a British cavalry member. He went out to India. He was a Bengali cavalryman, where if you're familiar with that in the late 1800s, you see them kind of like they went into Africa, India. And then we have the other son. Love his backstory. I like it. It's like it's like a Kill Bill revenge story so Johnny, the other brother, his mother was a Mexican woman. Basically, like he turned a hoe into a housewife. That's what they're implying.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, you find out that like a guy who can stay away from the bottle for a certain amount of time. He can not drink for a day, a week, a year. Eventually, he's gonna fall back into his old ways. They imply that she fell back into her old ways. She got kicked out in the middle of the night, ran back down south of the border. While she was like a prostitute, a piece of shit, like a customer kills her, gets away with it. So Johnny goes on revenge.
Yeah, because he was like a man of power in that area.
Yeah. So he got away with it. So instead of following justice and like the rule of land, he did the old school revenge story. And eventually, after a decade, right, like he got everyone on the jury killed too. Like everyone involved with getting the guy off, he kills. And but now he's like a good looking guy. They're both like good looking sons. He describes him, he has they call him Red. He has like everything is rojo, like everything's red.
Mm-hmm.
So that's basically just it. And like you meet Marabella, who is the youngest daughter. So there's 3 half siblings, and they're all back on the ranch. What are their motives? What are their motives? We don't know. That's the mystery behind it. So
and all 3 is Trudy's mother died because like a horse like threw her, and then after the funeral, Murdoch Lancer, who's the patriarch, after the funeral he went back and shot. He was so distraught he shot that same horse.
I love that line though. Reading that line was great. Where it's like, and then soon after the funeral, put a bullet in the horse's head. It's cathartic. It's like cathartic to get it out. But that was a great line. Again, the narrator of this book, it sounds a lot like Tarantino, but it's not. I love the way it's written. All right, so chapter 9 is what I was trying to say. It's Rick's first day on the job on set. He gets dropped off by our buddy Cliff. And it's think less hippie, more Hell's Angels. All right, so this is first day on the job. He's a little antsy because he's playing a character he's not used to playing. There's a line where they says you're a Eisenhower actor in a Dennis Hopper Hollywood, which is great. That comes up later on, but tell you basically chapter 9. There's a whole thing where it's like he still needs the motivation from Cliff. He's like, hey man, like you're Cliff fucking Dalton. Like that's still going on. You have the first hints of the Bruce Lee situation, which we'll get into later on. Yeah. So, basically it's like, what should I do? You need me for anything? That type of deal. One less word of encouragement, one less pep talk, and Rick is on his way, finds his spot on the set. But here's pep talk number 2. This time it's from the director of the series, Wanamaker, Sam Wanamaker.
Yeah.
And in the movie, you see that he's uneasy. Leonardo DiCaprio portrays the character, and he's very uneasy. But now you have his inner monologue, and it's like you see more of what he's thinking. And Tarantino was very he used the N word a lot in the '90s movies, and especially in like Django and everything. This uses the F word a lot. You notice that, right?
Yeah. And again, like as I've said about Hateful Eight and Django, it's just realism. Like it's set in the 1960s. What was the whole point of like the gay rights movement? It was counterculture, right? And he's
Same here.
emphasizing the viewpoint of the characters. Because anytime he says like fag or any of its variants, he says it as their thoughts or something, or as a quote. It's not like, oh, like this, like so and so walks in, you could tell he's a so and so, da da da, and then Rick meets him. Like it's just done in their head. Again, it just shows, and they use the N word too. Like in the chapter when they were describing George Span and Squeaky,
Oh,
where
with Mannix,
yeah, with the show
the show
Mannix,
Mannix.
where
Yeah,
like, oh, the secretary is
yeah.
N word, and she's like, yeah, it's an N word. It's like at first like looking at the word on a page is like, whoa, but then you realize it's like, you know, this old ass like blind white man that was probably born in like 1880 or even 1870 because he was like in his 80s in like 1969, and this girl who's a white girl in the 60s. Like we've all seen those pictures of like Little Rock.
And she's in the Manson family, so okay.
Exactly. You've seen the video when we were talking
Oh
about
yeah, yeah. 54, right?
what we were talking about Frankie Lyman.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
it's not out of the realm of possibility.
All
That
right,
this is how people talk.
so like transcendentalism was like that's the style of writing where they would use like nature to like describe things. Remember that's what it was. QT Tarantino in this, everything is like he does the same thing, but it's with like blue collar, like cars. Like he's describing them like Sam Wanamaker is like high octane, like over the top, full gear, and Rick Dalton is a quarter low in his gas. Like the way he's describing how they are, it's like with like muscle cars and stuff, which is like of the time. And he does that throughout the chapter, and it's great. You get an idea of like the energies coming off both the guys. Wanamaker gives him a pep talk. Again, Rick is like, "Oh man, I don't look like some hippie faggot." He's doing the whole thing, and then right away he's like, "Rebecca," and like he's like eyeing them up. And again, another thing in this book, it's about like the how people deal with each other sexually. So it's like he can tell that like the girl Rebecca and him are like sleeping together. Like that's a big thing in this book where like Roman Polanski can tell that Steve McQueen has been with his wife, and but he's been with that guy's ex fiance. So like that's a real part of like hierarchy or like the way people deal with each other. There's a lot of sexual stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the pep talk, he's like, you know, he wanted to wear the mustache. The lead wanted to wear the mustache, but he's not going to get to. I'm going to wear the mustache, so that gets him kind of excited and kind of gets him off. And he's like, "All right, I'm ready to
Yeah.
do this role because, again, this is where it happens, where it's like,
Because at this point, remember the whole point of the movie is like he's down on himself and he feels like his time has already passed. So any little win that he could get over like the new swinging dick,
mhm.
as they say in the book, it feels like adding another notch to the belt.
Yeah, so like he's getting off on pissing off the other actor. That's like his motivation. Usually, like,
Hmm.
what's my motivation? The other guy's annoyed that you get to you get to look like the cool look. So Rick is playing the heavy in this one, and now he's ready to go. He's getting pumped up from him. He has to come to realize that he has to play different roles because like at one point he says the Brio Cream generation is dead. Because he was a big star in the '50s and the early '60s. Like I said earlier, with the Eisenhower actor and Dennis Hopper Hollywood. So now he's going to look like more of like a spaghetti western or just like Easy Rider So he's a little uneasy about it. He's like, "Can you even tell that this is me?" And it's called acting, honey. So basically, it's him getting comfortable in his own skin, and he has all these layers over him. They give him like the hippie hair and everything.
Yeah, and he tells them like they talk about like Shakespeare like a little bit.
Hamlet, yeah, he describes him as that.
Yeah, and he was like, I never. He was like, have you done theater? And he's like, no, I never did any like theater work. So I think that in of itself like exposed that like Rick Dalton just assumed he was just gonna be like Rick Dalton in every single role that he played. Whereas like being an actor means you kind of gotta like you have to become that role. Which is ironically in the film like Swords is played by Al Pacino. And it's like think about how many times like Al Pacino like leaned real heavy. Like you can't sit down and say like, all right, in this movie Al Pacino is just Al Pacino as he leans into these roles. Like a lot of people would try to say like Carlito and Tony Montana are like the same character. And it's like when you watch Carlito's Way and Scarface, you could easily tell the difference.
Way different.
Yeah, even like his his Spanish like dialect is different.
Well, Puerto Rican and then Cuban.
Exactly.
But like Puerto Rican, they're more. Well, first off, Puerto Ricans are like American, so like he has that going. He's a New Yorker. When he plays Scarface, when he's in the Scarface movie, he's more like there's nothing not much deeper than like his need to be in charge and power and stuff like that. Carlito is more sensitive and shit. It's very evident.
And guess what? Like he has like a 50-year acting career.
Al Pacino.
Exactly.
That's all you gotta say. That's not that thing about Al Pacino. I was so nervous to work with Al Pacino, and then I had to break the ice with him. And I'm next to him, and Al Pacino did it for me. He goes up to him, "Hey, baby, you see that moon? That's our moon, baby. That's ours." And that was the first time they talked to this actor and him. That's how they broke the ice. Chapter 10, Misadventure. Here we go. Cliff.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so this is the opening line of the chapter. The minute Cliff shot his wife with the shark gun, he knew it was a bad idea. Great line.
They elaborated on it. It was like a 30-second scene in a movie, and that may even be like a generous
way less.
estimation. They actually had was that Rebecca Gayheart? I think it was her. People know her from like Jawbreaker, like music videos and stuff. She was on different things, but she played the role. And actually like did it like a lot of justice, especially when you read what was said in that chapter, where it's like, well, everybody knew like she was like an ass, like Billy was like a pain in the ass, and when she wasn't like yelling, she was drinking, and when she drank, she yelled and like all that stuff.
Yeah, so it's like Billy's booth, or something. So like, so she gets shot and she's cut in half, and it's kind of like over the top, and it's like they retell their like story together while he's holding her together, literally holding,
and
they're holding
like,
it together, literally,
and they were like the most loving they probably been in their whole marriage, like when she was dying.
Yeah, doing the baby talk.
Yeah, and he was holding her halves together because she was basically broken in half. And then by the time like the Coast Guard came, this was over 7 hours. Then the Coast Guard came, and then like the transfer from the one boat to like the Coast Guard boat was when she died.
Well, think about it like this: it's on a boat. All right, and we're talking about open secrets in Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
Today, I'm talking to you. Who comes to mind first? Harvey Weinstein. Bill Cosby comes to mind. Things that people talked about. Oh, this is going on, but it never really came to complete light. Nothing was ever. No actions were taken until recently.
Well,
So you have these open secrets, and then it's on a boat. There's an infamous thing that happened with Robert Wagner and Natalie West. So that's why I thought that's why the significance of it being on a boat. I don't know anything about.
And then he got off because of like lack of evidence, which kind of makes sense because it's like if you got to think of it, obviously like how law in this country is supposed to work is like innocent until proven guilty. So you have to assume that he's innocent. So if he says him and his wife were on this boat in the open sea together, and they were fly fishing or whatever, harpoon fishing, and he was holding a harpoon and he accidentally killed her with it, it's gonna be quite the uphill climb to prove that there was intention. And as he tells it, he was, he said it's like I don't. He Cliff's character was seemingly he doesn't even know if he did it
Yeah, yeah.
intentionally.
It's like, did I? I don't remember. Like he blacked out.
Yeah.
Um, but again, with the court system in America, it's theater too. It's
Hmm.
performance. If you have a better, like with OJ, another thing that happened in Hollywood with Nicole Brown, that there was rumors of him in the '80s with her. There was like domestic violence, shit like that. And then when it came out in court, the theater of it all, and we're talking about actors. And this glove, you must have quit. The glove don't fit. You must have quit. You remember that? You remember? And it's like the
Yeah.
facts. It's the performance of it. So basically, he gets away with murder on set, literally and figuratively. He gets away with murder. So that's why
Yeah.
people don't like him on set. That came up too. That Cliff couldn't work on Lancer because of his reputation.
Yeah. And it was kind of like commentary on society today, where it's just like even though you've been and it's good that you brought up like OJ Simpson, where it's like even though you've been acquitted in a court of law, what matters is public opinion. How have you been judged in the court of public opinion? And in his case, it was like the stunt community. So he already had that strike against him where people was like he killed his wife and got away with it. That was the story in the stunt community. But in our chapter, they really elaborated on the legend of Cliff Booth. And it said that his job was basically as a ringer in the boxing community. A ringer is like a guy who could go in and you could bet money on and he's gonna win the fight because the other guy's like either gonna take a fall or he's really like good at it. But they would hire Cliff Booth to play, to basically just come on set and work that one day in situations where, there was somebody on the set that needed their ass kicked, especially for the stunt community with people who would, what they refer to in the book as tagging, which is when they're supposed to do stunt fighting, and the actor lands a punch because that's one of the things like they elaborated on that like the stunt community hates when actors take it upon themselves to do their own stunts because usually they're not coordinated to stop. They're not coordinated enough to only go 3/4 of the way. So one of the famous people, since we talked about Wild Wild West, was Robert Conrad. Did it say that he beat him up one episode and got fired?
Oh no, well, it's in another chapter that they go into it in depth later on. But it's the rumor. Well, they talk about like $700 and like a case of beer. Go in there,
Yeah.
but yeah. So I'm not sure if I don't know. But let me say something about tagging. And you said about 3/4 of the way. All right, so I have to think about wrestling. Okay, so tagging. They talk about that in wrestling too, where being stiff
Hmm.
in wrestling. That's the thing too, where like this guy's too stiff. You got to get a receipt next time because he was potatoing me. And you say like a Bret Hart looked like he was actually hitting you, but he wasn't hurting you. So everyone loved working with Bret. So it's kind of like I love working with Cliff, but I
It's
hate working with a guy, an actor who wants to.
something he prided himself on to this day.
Yeah. So it's like that. But yeah, keep going with the Wild Wild West because they talk about it.
Yeah, well, Robert Conrad was one of the people, and he was one of the situations where he got his ass kicked and got fired. Cliff got fired, and it was an interesting thing when I was reading the book, and I tweeted it when I was reading it because it was like, yeah, he got $700, and then like he didn't have to pay for a drink, or he would have a case of beer, and I was just like, anytime you hear a story, it's like, yeah, just give me a case of beer and we're even. Da, da, da. And I like it like dawned on me for a second. It was like, for some reason, even though you can afford a case of beer or you can afford a drink, somebody buying it for you means so much more that it feels almost like they paid like 10 times as much as you would have paid for it. So I always thought, like when I was reading it, it just dawned on me like how rewarding it is $700, like on top of $700 extra dollars, was a case of beer.
Yeah, it's like a warrior thing too. Like you get the respect from your peers and uh tastes that much better.
Yeah. But I
Uh
was just reading and I was like, being like a ringer is like a dream job. I mean, you imagine just getting hired to a job every day where it's just like you know how you complain about like the people you
or
work with. Like if they hire me for one day, I was just like, yo, Suge's coming here, he's gonna slap the
stir,
shit out
stir
of.
the shit. Yeah.
Yeah, like I wish I could have that job. It would be such a
You
beautiful thing.
you say the thing that I am thinking,
Yeah.
and you do it. One thing I want to say about the next chapter, chapter 11, the Twinkie truck. So basically, this is Charlie. This takes place. You got Cliff on the roof, and
Yeah.
he's watching this, which reminds me of a western where a guy on a canyon, on top of a cliff. His name is Cliff, watching all this shit happen. Basically, talking about Charlie Manson in the music industry, trying to be a rock star. You
Mm-hmm.
see the kind of humanizing him, where he's not this little like spirit that's like a guru, like floating around like giving these words of inspiration to these family.
Yeah.
He's fucking weak. He looks weak.
Yeah. Because it was kind of like how people say like Hitler was like a failed artist.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's kind of the same way that like Charles Manson was like a failed musician. Like nobody wanted to work with him, and that's the. I mean, not the reason, but it's part of the inspiration for them to do such evil things. Is because they wanted to do certain things and weren't successful at it.
Yeah. So like the spiritual leader was like a means to an end of being a rock star. He wanted to be the freaking Beatles. He loved bubblegum music. So like him getting stood up. No, the guy Terry no shows the open house of him performing. So it made him look weak in front of his family. And it reminds me of he's a con man. Charlie Manson's a con man. We're familiar with con men. We just had one for a couple years. So like Donald Trump, I'm gonna talk about him real quick. So basically, remember how shocked he looked when he won in 2016? He was
Yeah,
like he was not there.
a
He was
belief
used
I've always felt. Yeah,
he was using the election to get his new news. He was going to do a new news channel, or whatever, and that was like kind of the means to the end. It was to get the name Trump out there for the next project, and he just ended up becoming the president. But that was kind of like the means to it. And then this whole thing happened. The MAGA family. Uh,
MAGA family, the
yeah.
Manson family.
That's one thing. So when Charlie Manson goes up to the house, it's he thinks that's the guy Terry's house, but he moved out. It's the house where Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate are now. So they're like, oh no, they're not here right now. The owner's in the back, so he talks to the guy in the back. That's not that. That just shows that he's still trying and he looks weak in front of the guy, and the guy's basically saying, "Get out of here." But he was invited back. That's important because
Mhm.
of the mythology of vampires. So when they opened the door for him, Sharon Tate, the poster was the Fearless Vampire Killers, which is like the big hit he had
Well,
overseas.
Sebring opened the door for him.
Yeah, whoever, but they opened the door,
Hmm.
and it's Sebring, Sharon Tate's ex, who's living with them, ex fiance, and her. And that's like that's Roman Polanski's thing with Sharon Tate was the vampire killers. And I just the idea of a vampire, you have to invite them in, and Charlie Manson's this little figure that they're trying to. Tarantino's invoking the whole vampire thing, the bloodsucker thing. That's what I got from them showing the poster. I like that. I like that type of stuff. And then what's the significance of the Twinkie truck? Did you think anything of it? I think it's because it's like fake, like hollow. It's not. It's just like it looks pretty, but it doesn't give you anything. Like emptiness. I don't know. I'm looking into it deep.
I mean, perhaps maybe you saw something that I didn't. I did find it peculiar that it was specifically like a Twinkie truck because I think in a movie I thought like when I watched the movie I thought it was like an ice cream truck. In the same way that like people go to junkyards and they need a car and they'll find like an old police car, and at the same time maybe he needed a van and he went somewhere and they had like an old like ice cream van for like cheap, and that's all they could afford. So
You mentioned a police car and junk. That reminds me of Always Sunny. And in Always Sunny,
yeah.
Matt goes, everything I say is very deliberate. So
Mhm.
everything he does in this book is deliberate. So we'll figure out why is it Twinkie. Well, who knows? Maybe whatever. So chapter 12 is next, and this is a long one. This is like a big chapter. You can call me Marabella. All right, so this is like the scene with
Yeah. I mean, but before we think they had like a little interaction
mm,
between Cliff and um Charles Manson, where Charles Manson was trying to like give him like salutation or whatever, and like Cliff was just staring at him like a weirdo. And it was interesting because it was like one of my favorite. I feel like this whole section that we read this week, well, it involved like virtually like all of my favorite scenes in the movie. I feel like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood probably had like the best middle section of any of his films, to be honest with you. Like in the middle part of the movie, like the entree was, I thought, one of the best. Like every other movie, it's either it plays out over the span of the film or it has a really big climax. But this one, I feel like all of the like really really good like acting and like written scenes were in the middle, and they were elaborated on in this section. And again, like elaboration, it has a lot more depth. I've noticed in his recent films, like he's inserted like his narration to the films, but it's been like minimal. Whereas in this book, he was able to like expand and like describe things that he wasn't able to describe in 2.5 hour film.
hmm. Yeah, so we have the next one. Again, it's elaborating on Rick Dalton's first day on the job. He's getting comfortable with himself in his new look. Caleb, his character. He's dressed like the Easy Rider type, groovy. He's looking groovy. It's lunchtime, so like Wild West shows they always talk about ghost towns and shit, and like so like basically the set is turning into a ghost town where it's him just walking around. So all right, the part where he keeps saying I don't want to look like a hippie it reminds me of an actor now who was popular in the 90s or 2000s saying, "Come on, man, what is this? Some like woke shit?" Like him
Mhm.
walking around like I don't look like a woke, So that's why I get like where he's like, all right, maybe I can get into this role. All right, whatever. I like it. And he sits next to Maribel, the child actor. There's one part that jumped out at me where he's like, when he's asked, like, do you prefer the good guy or being the bad guy? And he's like, I like being the good guy. And he's like, when the bad guy always loses at the end. And she's like, so he's like, well, I don't want to look like I can lose. It's like a wrestling thing. The heel loses, and
Mhm.
she's like, come on, like, the bad guy's supposed to lose. Like, embrace it, embrace your role. Again, this actor's been around for 20 something years, and he's like being taught by an 8-year-old how to act. That's like the irony of it. He brings up. Is this where he brings up the younger? Yeah, he brings up another pilot he worked on. He's like with like 11-year-old, and he's saying like, well, if that show got picked up, I could have been with him for years. We could have been tied together. He could have been like a younger brother to me. But show never got picked up, and then nothing happened.
Mhm.
And so it's basically saying that he has a relationship with child actors before, but this one's different. It's kind of meta because he's reading a pulp western book, and we're reading a pulp western book, pretty much. What's this? Why she's reading Disney? Like, that mean anything to you? She's reading a
Yeah,
book
she
about
was
Disney.
reading like the autobiography of or biography of Walt Disney. So, it was talking about him as like a genius because, if you think about it at this time, 1969, 2 years before Disney World opened, 10 years, 10 or more years after Disneyland had opened up, all of these movies that became ingrained with American culture. He had his like weekly show, so he was very admirable. His genius was admirable, and this was like not even like a decade after, like within the same decade that he died. So if you had to liken it to somebody, think about all of the shit that came out after Steve Jobs died. Where people was like, "Oh, Steve Jobs did this, Steve Jobs did that. Make a movie about Steve Jobs. Let's make another movie about Steve
Hmm.
Jobs." Like it was Walt Disney at that point was that same person.
Yeah, the face of something.
Like, a matter of fact, even before you even go on, like to elaborate on that, like today, and even as kids, we probably thought of like the name Disney as a brand, whereas like back then, like Walt Disney was still a person. The name Disney was still associated with that man, like the
like
actual man.
like Nike, you know. He
Phil
was a
Knight.
real yeah, he was a real guy, you know, at that point. Now it's like Nike just represents the sneaker, and you know what I mean? Like that,
No,
that,
the name of the company is Nike, but his name is
yeah,
Phil Knight.
yeah, whatever. Yeah, that's what I meant. Like he was a real person. I thought it was not pronounced Nike or whatever.
No, it's Knight, like as in like
Ah, okay.
yeah.
So, yeah, so that I was thinking about that because in the '60s you also had did a lot of Disney westerns, and what's his name? Kurt Russell worked on it. And that was a Disney. He was a Disney kid.
Yeah.
Another head nod, tip of the cat to our buddy. Um, yeah, I like the way the inner monologue is great here because you don't get it in the movie.
Yeah, he talked about her like a grown ass person. It was like
Betty
this
Davis,
asshole.
pint-sized Betty Davis.
Yeah.
Every word imaginable, he said it and he gave it to her. And hey, I like when she's like, you know, like I'm an actor, not an actress. You know,
Very
that's redundant.
relatable. It's funny because I was actually had like a little interaction on social media where I was saying I was like I don't even say the term actress anymore. I'm hit because people still use it. I'm like you're not as progressive as you think. You're still saying actress. Like it's just actor, female actor, male actor, especially in this day and age where people don't assume any gender. Just saying actor is enough.
Waiter, yeah, you do a server,
Yeah.
not a waiter or waitress anymore. Uh, the Sweet Body of Deborah, chapter 13. All right, so this was cool because we're gonna get into the whole Bruce Lee incident,
Mm-hmm.
as in quotes, but they also talk about Jim Brown,
Yeah.
which is it's another moment. There you go.
One of my favorite movies of all time, the 100 Rifles. We talked about, interracial relationships in film. This was like the first movie that had like an interracial like love scene between Jim Brown and Raquel Welch. It also stars the late great Burt Reynolds, who was, supposed to play George Span in this movie, but died before they started shooting. Also,
He,
Eric Braeden, if anybody knows him, Victor from Young and the Restless was also in this film. Great movie. I love this movie.
Burt Reynolds did get to rehearse though as the character George
Yeah.
Span, so that's I'm not sure if they filmed it. But yeah, so they have like there's rumors of Cliff either knocking out Jim Brown, like that's like a fantasy, like
Yeah, they're saying like that one was like made up.
yeah,
In,
because it
in this
well,
universe, I want to
yeah,
like elaborate, like establish that
yeah,
in this universe because there's an issue with the Bruce Lee fight that I'm gonna bring up that's been recurring since the movie has been released.
2 years ago this week, I
Yeah,
think.
and just got brought back into the forefront with the book because I guess in his family's eyes they kind of like double down on offending him according to them.
Yeah. So there's a multiple choice part where it's like either A, Cliff knocks out Jim Brown, or B, that, or C, and then or D, none of the above. I
Yeah,
like that. I like that's meta, like writing, like yeah. So this is like the four things that Cliff is known for. It used to be his military career, but now after the whole death of his wife, that supersedes it now. So that's like what he's known for. And then this is where they say like he's known for being a ringer. I think yeah. So like they go into the whole in-depth look at like $700. Don't pay for a drink at the hotel bar. Shut up like an actor on the set. So that's why they mentioned the Wild Wild West, but they also mentioned Bruce Lee, and he's trying to the narrator Tarantino pretty much. He's like, all right, this is before Bruce Lee was Bruce Lee. He was still trying to make it in Hollywood. He compares him to Charlie Manson. Did you notice that
okay,
part? But
yeah,
he mentions it. He goes the same way that Manson would hang out with Beach Boy guys and try to be a rock star. Bruce Lee would be like a trainer to the stars. That was his means to get into being a Hollywood star.
hmm
I knew that already. I knew all about that. So they say that. So now it makes more sense. Like why even bring it up? It's because in the book, not in the movie, but in the book, they mentioned that Bruce Lee was in talks with Polanski to work on a project. So he's now tied into the story.
yeah,
Uh, again, Bruce Lee is a petite guy. Same with Polanski. You
Yeah.
know, that's another thing he always brings up. So they mentioned that he had a relationship with Polanski. So let's get into the controversy.
Yeah, so Sharon Lee is saying like it was disrespectful, his portrayal in the film, and now in the book because it makes him like boastful, and it makes him makes him look boastful and arrogant. But Quentin Tarantino's inspiration for this character was Ivan Bell, I believe,
Yeah, something like that. You mentioned
who's like an actual like stunt person, and it was his story that in the stunt community, like Bruce Lee would be very very like boastful, and he would actually be the one, and he would beat the shit out of American stuntmen, and he had that reputation. Like, so it wasn't like something like he just made up. It's just a piece of information, and he took it and then elaborated on it. But again, these are fictional characters. Cliff Booth, like, spoiler alert, if you've not seen the fucking movie, Sharon Tate doesn't get killed. It's Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski's, Sharon Tate, Roman Polanski's, and Sharon Tate's son, I mean, child alive today? No. Did the Manson family get murdered before they could commit those crimes? No, it's all a fictional retelling. Like Bruce Lee in the book is not Bruce Lee in real life. Like perhaps Bruce Lee would have beat the shit out of Brad Pitt. As a matter of fact, Brad Pitt and I forgot who else it was. It was like Brad Pitt and his stuntman. Like Quentin Tarantino actually wanted a more elaborate fight scene, and those two were like, nah, like I'm like Bruce Lee would not get beat up like that bad, So it could have been a lot worse, and it wasn't. And the actor that's portrayed him has he's actually denounced his role in the film because he felt it was disrespectful. Again, I don't see how it is. I mean, if you want to talk about disrespect, like Game of Death use footage from Bruce Lee's funeral and use cardboard cutouts and all kind of different like movie
mouth.
magic things to make it seem like he was alive when it wasn't him. And then Sharon Lee's brother, Brandon Lee, famously died because he was shot with a prop gun that was didn't have blanks in them, had real bullets, and they still released the crow. And these are actual events that disrespect your family. And I'm not saying you shouldn't be offended by those events, but I think like having your father lose a 2 out of 3 fight to a fictional stuntman is like not the worst thing a movie has done to your family. Even in the fight, he didn't come out with like a scratch. It ain't like he was put in the hospital or something like that.
So the fact that he beats Bruce Lee in the thing is to show how it's hyping up Bruce Lee. Like, wow, this character beat up the great Bruce Lee. You know, that's like if he knocked out Muhammad Ali. Wow, he knocked out the great. It's not like he's saying, "Oh, I'm better than Muhammad Ali because he's better
Yeah.
than every black." Like they go into this whole crazy thing where it's like, but it's not a documentary.
It's
This is the argument for everything. Is always like
it's
you have to
it's
make it like,
it's,
yeah,
it's funny. Look at like a couple weeks ago, Floyd Mayweather. That's actually Floyd Mayweather, and he made a whole like joke of his career by fucking having an even fight against a YouTuber. And that's like a real thing that happened. I'm like, this is fictional. Like it's movie line. It's an escape. And there was something where I was hyped to see Bruce Lee. I think we all already have our opinion of Bruce Lee, which is like a very like high one.
I have a poster of him right here. I always say this. Well, I used to say this as a kid, like 15 years ago. I would always say pop culture prophets or something. I used a word like that. That like crossed cultures and crossed like race and all that. I always said, like Bruce Lee, Michael Jordan, even like Muhammad Ali, like people all look up to him, crossing, different barriers. And that's the thing that comes up too. People got offended by him saying American stuntman because Bruce Lee's he was born in California. But the point is that Bruce Lee spent half his career also in Hong Kong.
Yeah,
Like
that's where
that's the
he made his
distinction.
bones, and then he came back over in San Francisco, and then he got into the film industry there. So even
He
though
was a
he was born in America, he was raised, or his profile was at least raised, in Hong Kong cinema.
and Hong Kong was also Western at the time. They were British, but he was a child actor too. So that's a lot of stuff that Bruce Lee was deeper than this myth that they have of him. He was an actor and everything. I don't know. I think the point of him beating Bruce Lee is to show that wow, you beat the great. Like it's supposed to be a compliment, but it's
Hmm.
not taken as a compliment. When I saw this in theaters, this is before I saw anything on the internet or they didn't really talk about it. I think even at that time I wasn't really on Twitter. So I went into it going, wow, that was a good scene. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
I didn't go into it like where
I,
oh,
I
this is uncomfortable.
I thought like it wasn't meant to diminish like Bruce Lee. I think it was supposed to enhance Cliff Booth to be like, oh, this dude's like a badass.
Yeah.
Especially if you're making a movie about like somebody's like gopher, and there's like this mystery about him, and like this mystery badass about him. Like, a matter of fact, like, put it this way, like, if there wasn't that scene of him and Bruce Lee fighting, right? Take that scene out of it, right? The scene at the end, the climax of the movie, when the La Bianca Cielo Drive murders were gonna happen, or the La Bianca Tate murders were gonna happen on Cielo Drive, and Rick and Cliff like squash it, right? Wouldn't it seem like out of place without that Bruce Lee scene, because we all knew like he was a badass and he was high off acid and he was beating the shit out of these kids. I mean, sure, you could look back at like the scene on the Spawn Ranch, which I assume is going to be in next week's episode in the book when we read it. But in the movie, the scene on Spawn Ranch when he beats the shit out of Tex and the kids there, he's of sound mind. So you'd figure of sound mind he would beat the shit out of these kids. But if you don't include the Bruce Lee scene, the fact that he's high off acid in the last scene, it would seem like farcical. But this establishing that, like, in sound mind, he could go toe to toe with Bruce Lee. It makes the fact that like him being able to like beat up some people actually trying to murder him would actually happen, because while high on acid, it seems like logical, so to speak, because like, like one of the greatest martial artists in the history of man, or at least the ones that we knew, he was able to beat that person up.
Yeah, it's fantasy booking. It's like when you're in the barbershop, like where they're talking about like the boxers can, like in Coming to America, with that
You
famous
beat
scene.
Joe Lewis's ass.
Yeah, that's basically what it is. It's like, it's a fantasy pissing contest there.
Yeah.
Chapter 14. All right, I have a little backstory to this. The Wrecking Crew. So this is the scene where Sharon Tate sees her movie, the movie with Dean Martin, The Wrecking Crew. So all week long, well, when I was resting, I didn't really feel well. I watched a lot of podcasts with Tarantino and interviews with Tarantino, and apparently, the part where Sharon Tate's like, "That's my name here on the poster," and they, "Want to take a picture?" And they take a picture. That happened to Tarantino when he saw True Romance. He
Really?
goes, "That's my name." Yeah, on the poster. He goes, and it was the same theater in L.A. He was like, "That's my name. Can I get in?" He's like,
Yeah, yeah.
So basically, so in the movie, I was like, "All right, I get it." It was kind of like, I don't want to say the weakest, but it's just like it felt the most out of place a little bit,
Hmm.
because like Sharon Tate, I know like everyone was saying, oh, they needed more and more Sharon Tate,
Yeah.
but this is her like spotlight moment. But now it makes more sense that it's autobiographical, because Tarantino saw himself in this apparently when he saw True Romance, because his name was on it, but he wasn't a star yet.
Yeah, like the whole the whole book like adds depth to the characters and certain scenes of the movie. And Tarantino got like a lot of heat. Like, I remember he had like a tense back and forth with like a reporter at Con.
No, yeah, he goes, I disagree with your, I don't agree with your hypothesis.
Yeah, because it's not a Sharon Tate movie. It's just a movie set in Hollywood during the time that Sharon Tate's murders happened. And it's not about Sharon Tate, it's about Sharon Tate's neighbors.
Mhm.
You know, at the end of the day, it's about her neighbors. And I think Margot Robbie did excellent acting in it with the few scenes that she had. Which was by design. It was not a Sharon Tate movie.
There's a movie that came out where it just happens to take place, I think, around the time John Lennon gets killed, but it's not a John Lennon movie.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like that, where like it has something to do with it, but it's not like that's like me going, "How come there's not more scenes with John Lennon?" I
Yeah.
forgot what movie it was.
Or like even like Forrest Gump. Like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
why don't they feature John F. Kennedy more or Elvis? It's
Mhm.
like nah, it's like that's used as background. It's like as if you're living in Hollywood, so to speak. Think of it like prime example, Summer of Sam by Spike Lee.
Mm.
Does anybody be like, oh well, why didn't Dave Berkowitz get more scenes? Like, nah, it was the backdrop. It was New York in 1977 with the backdrop of the serial killer, and we're gonna include some scenes with the serial killer, but it's gonna be sprinkled in. It's not about the serial killer. It's not a movie about the serial killer. It's about these people living in New York amidst these things happening. I was glad like he stood his ground. He's always stood his ground. As a matter of fact, one of his things he's talked about this week, unfortunately, on Joe Rogan's show is just like the thing that gave him like a long career in cinema is just the fact that he doesn't hold back. The movies he wants to make, he makes them. He doesn't make movies with a lot of like studio influence, and which is astounding considering like a lot of the movies that he's made with Harvey Weinstein, you know, who's known to be very like known to micromanage um
Yeah.
amongst other things.
They would say if 99% of the people in the studio loved the movie and he didn't like it, it wouldn't be made. If he liked it and 99% of the people hated it, it would be made, you know?
Yeah.
Um, that's a good point. That made me think of going back because all week long, last week or two, I've been watching old interviews of Tarantino from 2015, from this year, 2015, all the way back to 92. And everything he said, like he did. Like
Hmm.
he literally, like in 90, in the 97, he was talking about writing books. He said, I'm gonna write a book, I'm gonna write novels one day when I stop making films. This is 96, 97 when he was on Charlie Rose. 2015, he said the next thing I'm doing is probably a book, as he said, after he did Hateful Eight. And then so everything he says he basically does. The one thing that hasn't happened yet is Kill Bill 3, and he says, "Oh, maybe that might be the last movie, Kill Bill 3. Might be the last one."
Yeah.
Like that seems like all far-fetched. He said that in 2004, 2003, 2004, but he also said the same thing about writing a book in 97, and we're reading the book now on our podcast right now. All right, that's how he talks.
Mhm.
Um, so I think the next thing he does, like he says, "Oh, I'm gonna do Hateful Eight. I'm gonna have it on Broadway or in theaters, staged production, and I want to see other actors take my words and do it differently." Like that's his next goal,
Mhm.
I don't doubt it that he'll do it because he did it with the book. Stood his
Yeah.
ground.
Hmm.
Chapter 15. You're a natural born Edmund. All right, so this scene is another one with Rick Dalton and as the character Caleb on Lancer, and it's a quick one. It's
Hmm.
he's getting another pep talk. It's like all in the eyes. He kind of this is where he brings up Shakespeare, and he says like you remind me of Hamlet, and who's Hamlet? You know, he's like, oh, he's angry man.
Yeah.
So basically, he's like you're he is an angry man. That's who he's playing, angry aging Tsar.
Yeah. And like the last quick notes, you know, it kind of changed up like Cliff's day where like, you know, he had to fix the answer. So he dropped them. It was cool because it kind of like clarified like the timeline because in the movie he dropped Rick off at 8 and he was like, all right, I don't need you until you gotta like pick me up, but just do the thing with the antenna.
Hmm.
And he did the thing with the antenna and then kind of had like a whole day. And I was kind of like 8 in the morning, and in my head, I'm thinking like regular old like work like we do. I'm thinking like, oh, he probably has to pick him up at like 2 in the afternoon or something like that. And it's like, no, it's like he drops him off at like 8 a.m. and then the pickup time is like 7:15 or 7:30.
Yeah, rap is like, he goes, what time is rap? And he's like 7:30 or whatever. And he's like, okay.
Yeah, so it kind of like gave you like an idea of like the how like all that stuff that was what all that stuff that eventually happened, and
Mm.
then like he actually in the movie he straight up picks up Pussycat, but in the book it's like no, he goes to like this like erotic movie theater and then watches like a porno like double feature instead. I know the chapter just ends there, so I don't know. Maybe in the next chapter, sees that Pussycat still like outside looking for a ride, and he gives it to her.
Yeah, a few things happen in these chapters where I noticed it finally that words, dialogue from different scenes were changed. Like
Yeah.
things that Schwartz said was in the book. He says it, but in the movie it was given to, I think, Timothy Oliphant or someone gets that his dialogue. So I'm
Mhm.
already seeing it being changed a few times. And like before, you were saying this is like your most. This movie had the best like middle, like the meat on the bone. Like this part was this part. So yeah, this is like all the famous things. Like when you think of the movie, you think of the DiCaprio crying with the gun. He's like, yes, like this is the best acting ever. Like that was a big shot. That was a big moment. We're
Yeah.
seeing it now. So I mean, I'm excited. Like I love the things that aren't in the movie. Like see, knowing that Rick eventually is on Carson in the '70s. I love that because like it's like Mad Men. I want to see Mad Men in the '80s. You know, I like to see them continuing
Yeah. Yeah.
characters that I like.
Yeah.
That's where we left off on this part. Yeah, we're getting more into the meat of it.
Yeah. We're almost. I think we like three, like almost to the last like third of the book. So we'll see what we cover next week.